I've spent enough years watching folks to know this much. The ones carrying the heaviest shame are often the quietest about it. They learn to hide in plain sight. They build whole lives around the thing they cannot do, the secret they cannot speak. And every now and then, someone sees right through them, not to judge, but to help. I watched that happen once. In a small mountain town. The autumn of 1882. The pen sat on the counter like a dare. Luke Barrow stood in the doorway of Hollister's Inn. 5 months of mountain silence clinging to his buckskin coat. Every eye in the common room turned his way. The innkeeper pushed the guest book forward. Name and date, if you please. Luke crossed the plank floor, picked up the pen, turned it over twice. The steel nib caught the lamplight. Behind the counter, a woman in a calico dress stopped wiping a glass. Heavy set, dark hair pinned back. She watched his hand hover over the page. He signed with an X. Quick, sharp, like ripping off a bandage. The woman's rag stopped moving. Her eyes lifted to his face. He didn't look up. Room, he said. Week, maybe longer. She set down the glass, said nothing. But her gaze lingered on that X a moment too long. If this story speaks to you, I'd love to hear where you're watching from tonight. And if you've been enjoying these tales without subscribing, I'd be grateful if you'd consider joining us. It helps more than you know. Clara Hollister's hands worked the dough before the roosters woke. 4:30. The kitchen belonged to her at this hour. No customers. No father shuffling through with his tired sighs. Just the pop of kindling in the cook stove and the soft thump of her palms against flour-dusted wood. She shaped the loaves by feel. 14 years of mornings had taught her hands what her eyes didn't need to see. Her mother had stood at the same counter once, same apron, same flour tin with the dented lid. Clara had been 12 when the fever took her. Old enough to remember, young enough that the remembering still cut. A book lay propped against the flour tin. Jane Eyre. The spine cracked, pages soft as cloth. She read a paragraph between each fold of dough. The words were hers in a way nothing else was. By 6, the dining room filled. Traveling men, ranch hands, a drummer in a checkered vest who laughed too loud at his own jokes. Clara moved between tables with the coffee pot. Her body had learned to take up less space than it occupied. Eyes down, shoulders curved. If she was quiet enough, useful enough, they'd forget to look. The mountain man sat in the corner. Back to the wall. Same buckskin coat, though he'd brushed the worst of the trail dust off. His plate was clean. He ate like a man who'd known hunger steady. Unhurried. Wasting nothing. She refilled his cup without asking. He nodded once. Didn't speak. The drummer's voice cut across the room. Hey, Earl asked the fat one for more coffee. Would you? She ain't good for much else. Laughter. The kind that wanted an audience. Clara's hand stayed steady on the pot. Her face didn't change. She'd heard worse. Would hear worse again. But across the room, something shifted. The mountain man set down his spoon, slow, deliberate. His eyes found the drummer's face and stayed there. No words, no movement, just a stare, flat as stone. The drummer's laugh caught in his throat. His grin faltered. He looked down at his plate, suddenly interested in his eggs. Clara turned away before anyone could see her face. Later, after the drummer paid his bill and left without meeting her eyes, she brought the coffee pot back to the corner table. The mountain man looked up. He nodded. Just once. She nodded back. And for the first time in years, Clara Hollister wondered what someone saw when they looked at her. The post office smelled of ink and old paper. Luke stood at the counter, a leather poke heavy with gold dust in his left hand. His sister's face flickered in his mind, Sarah. 3 years younger, the only kin he had left. Her last letter had come 6 months ago, forwarded through a trading post in the high country. A neighbor had read it to him. The baby was coming. Money was short. Her husband's leg hadn't healed right since the sawmill accident. Luke had trapped all winter with her name on his lips, like a prayer. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, pushed a form across the counter. Wire transfer to Ohio. Write the address here, and the amount in this box. Luke picked up the pen. The steel nib felt wrong in his fingers, like holding a snake by the tail. He stared at the blank line. The letters he needed swam somewhere in his head, shapeless things he couldn't catch. S-A-R-A-H. He knew the sounds. Couldn't make them into marks. His hand hovered. A bead of sweat crawled down his spine despite the cool September air drifting through the open door. Something wrong. The clerk's voice carried a note of impatience. Forgot my spectacles. The words came out rough. Back at the inn. The clerk's eyebrows lifted. His gaze dropped to Luke's sun-darkened face. The calloused hands. The buckskin coat. Luke had seen that look before. The look that said, I know what you are. Come back when you find them. Then, Luke walked out. The gold dust stayed heavy in his pocket. The empty envelope stayed heavier in his chest. He didn't go back to his room. Couldn't stand 4 walls right now. Instead, he circled around to the back of the inn where a porch sagged under the weight of too many winters. Warped boards creaked under his boots. He lowered himself onto the top step and sat there, the crumpled envelope in his fist, staring at the mountains, turning purple in the fading light. 42 years old. Couldn't write his own sister's name? The shame sat in his throat like a stone he couldn't swallow. Inside the kitchen, dishes clattered, water splashed. He heard Clara's voice, muffled, answering something her father said. Then footsteps. The back door opened and closed. She didn't speak right away. Just stood there, drying her hands on her apron. The evening chill raised goosebumps on her bare forearms. A wool shawl hung over her shoulders, moth holes visible along the hem. After a long moment, she sat down. Not beside him, that would have been too familiar. Not on the step above, that would have been looking down at him. She chose the step below. Had to tilt her face up to see his. The silence stretched. She didn't fill it with chatter like most women would. Just sat there, hands folded in her lap, waiting. You signed with an X. Not a question, not an accusation. Just words laid out flat, the way you'd lay out cards on a table. Luke's jaw tightened. His grip crushed the envelope further. Lots of folks sign with an X. Ain't a crime? No, it ain't. Another silence. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The mountains swallowed the last of the daylight. You can't read. Still not a question. Nor write. The stone in his throat grew larger. He could lie. Should lie. but his tongue wouldn't shape the words. My pa died when I was 6. Kicked in the head by a mule. Ma worked the fields after that. Weren't no school within 30 miles. Weren't no time for learning letters, even if there was. He waited for the pity, the soft clucking sound women made when they felt sorry for you. Worse than mockery, that sound made a man feel small in a different way. Clara didn't make it. My ma taught me letters before she passed. Her voice was quiet, matter of fact. Only thing she left me worth keeping, that and her books. Luke turned his head, looked at her for the first time since she'd sat down. Her face was calm. No judgment in her eyes. No pity either. Why would you bother? The words scraped out of him. With me? I mean, you don't know me from Adam. She was quiet for a long moment. Her fingers traced a moth hole in her shawl. I figure everybody ought to at least read their own name. The simplicity of it caught him off guard. No grand speech, no Bible verse about charity, just a plain truth, spoken plain. I could teach you. She said it the way she might offer a cup of coffee. If you ain't too proud. Luke's hand unclenched. The crumpled envelope fell onto the step between them. His sister's name should have been written on it. Would have been. If he was a different man. Pride ain't got nothing to do with it. Then what? He didn't have an answer. Or maybe he had too many answers, all tangled up like fishing line. Clara stood, brushed off her apron, looked down at him with an expression he couldn't read. I finished the dishes at 9. Storeroom behind the kitchen. There's a slate board in there from when my ma taught me. Still got chalk, too. She went back inside. The door closed softly behind her. Luke sat on the porch until the stars came out. The crumpled envelope lay at his feet. His sister's face floated in his mind. Sarah, waiting for money that couldn't come because her brother couldn't write an address on a form. 42 years of hiding. 42 years of lies and workarounds and the constant fear of being found out. And now a woman he'd known for 3 days had seen straight through him. Hadn't laughed. Hadn't pitied. Had just offered him a slate board and some chalk like it was the simplest thing in the world. 9 o'clock. The storeroom. Luke picked up the envelope. Smoothed it flat against his knee. The paper was ruined now. Wrinkled beyond saving. He'd need a new one. And maybe, just maybe, he'd learn to write a name on it himself. The kitchen light went out. Clara's shadows passed behind the window, then disappeared. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon. Luke stayed on the porch, turning the ruined envelope over in his hands until the cold drove him inside. But the question she'd asked kept circling in his head like a hawk over open ground. Why would you bother? With me, he still didn't have an answer. But for the first time in 42 years, someone had offered to teach him how to find one. The storeroom smelled of flour and old wood. Luke stood in the doorway, his shadow stretching across sacks stamped Miller's Best, stacked 3 high against the back wall. A single tallow candle burned on an upturned crate, its flame barely enough to push back the darkness. Clara sat on a wooden box, a slate board propped on her knees. "Close the door," she said. "Sound carries." He pulled it shut behind him. The latch clicked. The room shrank to the size of the candlelight. Sit. Another crate waited across from her. Luke lowered himself onto it, the wood creaking under his weight. His knees nearly touched hers in the cramped space. He could smell soap on her skin. And beneath it, the faint sweetness of bread dough. Clara held up a piece of chalk. White, thin, fragile looking. You ever held one of these before? Once. Maybe twice. Long time ago. She placed it in his palm. His fingers closed around it like he was gripping a skinning knife. The chalk crumbled slightly under the pressure. Lighter, Clara said. It ain't gonna run away. Luke loosened his grip. The chalk felt wrong in his hand. Too small, too delicate. Made for children's fingers, not hands that had skinned elk and set beaver traps and hauled timber down mountainsides. Clara turned the slate toward him. She'd drawn the alphabet in 2 rows, each letter big and clear. A through M on top, N through Z below. These are all 26, she said. But we ain't starting there. We're starting with 4. She wiped the slate clean with her apron and drew 4 shapes. Slow, deliberate. The chalk made a soft scratching sound against the dark surface. L, U, K. That's your name, she said. 4 letters. That's all. Luke stared at the shapes. He'd seen them before on wanted posters, on store signs, on the spines of books his sister used to read aloud while their mother worked the fields. But they'd always been marks, without meaning, shapes that belonged to other people. Copy the first one, Clara said. The L. He pressed the chalk to the slate. His hand shook. A tremor he couldn't stop. Like the first time he'd aimed a rifle as a boy and couldn't hold the barrel steady. The mark he made looked nothing like hers. Crooked. Tilted. The vertical line wobbled. The horizontal line slashed too far to the right. Again. He tried. The second L was worse than the first. The chalk snapped under the pressure of his grip, leaving a white smear across the slate. Clara handed him another piece without comment. 3rd attempt. 4th. 5th. The slate filled with crooked lines that mocked him. Luke's jaw tightened. Sweat prickled along his hairline despite the cool air seeping through the storeroom walls. This is fool's work. The words came out harsh, louder than he'd intended. He threw the chalk down. It bounced off the slate and rolled into the shadows. I ain't built for it. 42 years old and can't make a straight line. This was a mistake. He started to rise, corpus. Clara didn't move, didn't raise her voice. Just bent down, picked up the chalk, and held it out to him. Sit down. I heard what you said. Sit down anyway. Something in her tone stopped him. Not anger, not pity, just a steadiness that reminded him of the way his mother used to speak when the mule got stubborn. Calm, patient, immovable. Luke sat. Clara placed the chalk back in his palm. Her fingers brushed his knuckles. Rough skin against rough skin. When my ma started teaching me, she said, I was 7 years old. Took me a whole summer just to write Clara without it looking like a drunk spider walked through ink. Cried about it more times than I can count. Wanted to quit every single day. She picked up her own piece of chalk and drew an L on the corner of the slate. Slow, steady, perfect. But she kept putting the chalk back in my hand. Every time I threw it down, she picked it up and gave it back. We didn't scold, didn't tell me I was smart or that I could do it. just handed me the chalk." She looked at him. The candlelight caught the brown of her eyes. "So that's what I'm doing? Handing you the chalk? What you do with it is up to you." Luke looked down at his hand. The white stick lay across his palm. Small, fragile, powerful enough to terrify a grown man. He put it to the slate. The L came out crooked. Again. But he didn't throw it down. U was worse. The curve at the bottom looked like a drunken horseshoe. K was a disaster. 3 lines that refused to meet where they were supposed to. 4 strokes. How hard could 4 strokes be? Hard enough that his first attempt looked like a fence after a windstorm. Clara watched. Said nothing. Didn't sigh. Didn't roll her eyes. Just sat there with her hands folded in her lap. Waiting. Luke wiped the slate clean with his sleeve. Started over. L. Crooked, but less than before. The curve almost curved. Still wrong, but recognizably a kopoi, the horizontal lines parallel for the first time. "Again," he said. Before she could, he wiped, he wrote, Luke. The letters shaky, uneven, like a foal finding its legs. Again, Luke. Again. His hand steadied. Not much. Enough. The candle had burned down a full inch by the time Clara said, "That's enough for tonight." Luke looked at the slate. His last attempt sat there in chalk dust and candlelight. 4 letters, wobbly, imperfect, but readable. Luke. His name, written by his own hand. He reached out and touched the letters with his fingertip. The chalk smudged slightly under his touch. He pulled his hand back. "It ain't pretty," he said. "Don't need to be pretty. Just needs to be yours." He stared at the slate. 42 years. 42 years of signing with an X, of memorizing prices because he couldn't read the tags, of handing letters to strangers and asking them to read aloud while he pretended he'd just forgotten his spectacles. 4 letters. That's all it took to put a crack in 42 years. Clara stood, brushed chalk dust off her apron. "Same time tomorrow. We'll work on your sister's name." She opened the storeroom door. Light from the kitchen spilled in. She'd left a lamp burning. Luke blinked against the brightness. "Why?" The question came out before he could stop it. "Why are you doing this? Ain't no profit in it for you." Clara paused in the doorway. Her profile caught the lamplight, the curve of her cheek, the set of her jaw. "Maybe I'm tired of being the only one around here who knows how to read." She walked into the kitchen. The door swung shut behind her. Luke sat alone in the storeroom. The candle guttering. The slate balanced on his knees. He looked at his name one more time. Luke. His name. He blew out the candle. Sat in the darkness for a long moment, listening to the silence of the inn settling around him. Tomorrow. She'd teach him Sarah's name. Sarah. 5 letters. 1 more than tonight. He ran his finger over the slate where the letters had been. The chalk dust came away on his skin. Proof he'd done something he'd never believed he could do. But as he rose to leave, another thought crept in. Clara's voice when she'd spoken of her mother. The roughness she'd tried to hide. The way her hands had gripped the chalk too tight when she drew that perfect L. She'd said her mother had taught her. Had said the books were all her mother left behind. But she'd never said how old she was when her mother died. Never said what it was like to learn alone after that. Never said if anyone had ever handed the chalk back to her when she wanted to quit. Luke opened the storeroom door. The kitchen was empty. Clara had already gone upstairs. He stood in the doorway, looking at the lamp she'd left burning for him, and wondered how many years she'd been waiting for someone to see her the way she'd just seen him. 3 weeks changed a man's hands. Luke noticed it while splitting wood behind the inn, the axe biting into pine rounds with the rhythm he'd known since boyhood. His palms had softened. Not much still calloused from years of trap lines and skinning knives, but the new calluses were different. Smaller. On the inside of his thumb and the pad of his index finger, chalk calluses. Writing calluses. He buried the axe in the chopping block and wiped his forehead with his sleeve. The October sun hung low over the mountains, painting the aspens gold and red. 3 weeks since he'd signed that guest book with an X. 3 weeks since Clara Hollister had sat down on a porch step and offered to teach him letters like it was nothing. You planning to stand there all day? Or you got more wood to split? Emmett Hollister leaned against the back door, a pipe clenched between his teeth. The innkeeper was 60 if he was a day, with a beard gone gray and eyes that missed nothing. Just catching my breath. Mr. Hollister. Emmett drew on the pipe. The tobacco smelled sweet, like cherries. You been here 3 weeks now. Most trappers don't stay past a night or two. Luke picked up another pine round. Set it on the block. Works good. Room's warm. No complaints. That ain't what I asked. The axe came down. The wood split clean. You sweet on my girl. Luke's hand stilled on the axe handle. He looked up. Emmett's face was unreadable behind the pipe smoke. No, sir. Just working off my room and board. Uh-huh. Emmett knocked the pipe against the doorframe, emptying ash onto the ground. She ain't had an easy time. My Clara. Folks around here don't see past what's on the outside. Never have. Luke said nothing. I'm just saying. Emmett tucked the pipe into his vest pocket. Whatever you're doing, don't make it harder for her. She's had enough hard. He went back inside. The door closed behind him. Luke stood there for a long moment, the axe heavy in his hands, the old man's words heavier in his chest. Then he split the rest of the wood without stopping, stacking it against the inn's back wall until his shoulders ached and his mind went quiet. That night, the storeroom felt smaller than usual. Clara had moved the crates closer together as the weather turned cold. A wool blanket lay folded on the one she used as a chair. She'd brought coffee tonight, 2 tin cups, steam rising in the candlelight. Luke sat across from her, the slate balanced on his knees. 3 weeks of practice had worn grooves into the wood where his thumbs rested. His progress was slower than he'd hoped, but steady. Some nights the letters came easy. Other nights they fought him like wild animals. Page 12, Clara said, holding up the McGuffey's primer. Read the first sentence. Luke squinted at the page. The letters had started to make sense 2 weeks ago, not all of them. Not always, but enough. He sounded out the words one at a time, his lips moving, his finger tracing beneath each one. The cat sat on the mat. Good. Next one. The dog ran to the man. Next. He turned the page. The sentences grew longer. His pace slowed. The sun sets in the west. The last word caught in his throat. He stared at it, sounding out the letters in his head. W-E-S-T, west, where the sun went down, where the mountains turned purple at the end of every day. "That's right," Clara said. Luke looked up. His voice came out rough. "That's the first whole sentence I ever read out loud. One I didn't have memorized from hearing it before." Clara's hands wrapped around her coffee cup. The steam drifted between them. "How's it feel?" He thought about it. Searched for words that fit. "Like the first time I tracked a deer and didn't lose the trail. Like I finally got somewhere I'd been trying to get to my whole life and didn't even know it till I arrived." The candle flickered. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the storeroom's single window. Frost had started forming on the glass fern patterns. Delicate as lace. Clara set down the primer. "We can stop early tonight. You've earned it." Neither of them moved to leave. Luke reached into his coat pocket. His fingers found the object he'd been carrying for 2 days, waiting for the right moment. Smooth wood, the shape of a leaf. "Got something for you." He held it out. A bookmark, carved from aspen wood. He'd used his skinning knife, working by lantern light in his room after the inn went quiet. The grain ran gold and white through the pale wood. He'd sanded it smooth with a scrap of leather until it wouldn't snag on paper. Clara took it carefully, turned it over in her hands. "You made this? Saw you reading that book every morning? The one propped against the flour tin? Figured you'd need something to mark your place." She ran her thumb along the edge. Her face did something he couldn't read. "Nobody ever made me anything before." "Well," Luke picked up his coffee cup. "Now somebody has." The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. More like the silence between two people who'd run out of things they needed to prove. "Tell me about the mountains," Clara said. "You've been up there 5 months. What's it like?" Luke drank his coffee, set the cup down, thought about how to answer. "Quiet," he said finally. "Quiet like you can't imagine. No voices, no wagons, no church bells, just wind and water and your own heartbeat. After a while, you start talking to yourself just to remember what words sound like. That sounds lonely." "It is." He paused. "But it's honest, too. Up there, ain't nobody to lie to. Ain't nobody to pretend for. You're just you and the mountain and whatever you brought with you in your head." The candle guttered. Clara reached out and straightened the wick. "My ma used to say books were like that," she said. "The only place she could be somebody else. Somebody who wasn't tired all the time. Somebody whose husband hadn't died and left her with a daughter to raise and an inn to run." "You remember her?" "Some. Mostly I remember the sound of her voice when she read to me. The way she held the book. The way she smelled like bread dough and rose water." Luke looked at the woman across from him. The candlelight caught the brown of her eyes, the strands of gray already threading through her dark hair. 26 years old, she'd said. Too young to have that much tired in her face. "You miss her." "Every day." Clara set the bookmark on top of the McGuffey's primer. "She died when I was 12. Fever took her in 3 days. After that, I taught myself the rest of the letters. The harder words. The books she left behind. That must have been hard. Learning alone. It was." She looked at him. "That's why I said yes. when you needed teaching, because I remember what it was like to want something so bad you can taste it, and having nobody to help you get there. The wind outside grew stronger. The frost patterns on the window thickened. You're doing good, Luke. The words hit him somewhere in the chest, a place he'd kept locked for a long time. Ain't never had anybody say that to me before? Well, Clara stood, brushed chalk dust off her apron. Now somebody has, she smiled, small, quick, there and gone, but real. Luke helped her gather the supplies, the slate, the chalk box, the primer. Their hands brushed as he handed her the candle. She pulled back first. Same time tomorrow. I'll be here. She went to the door, paused with her hand on the latch. Luke. Yeah. Thank you. For the bookmark. Then she was gone, the door swinging shut behind her, her footsteps fading up the stairs to her room above the kitchen. Luke sat alone in the dark storeroom. The smell of coffee and candle smoke hung in the air. The wool blanket still held the warmth where she'd been sitting. He reached for his coat and felt something crinkle in the pocket. The letter. Sarah's letter. The one the neighbor had read to him 6 months ago. He'd kept it all this time, folded and refolded until the creases had worn soft. He pulled it out, held it up to the moonlight coming through the frosted window. The words were still shapes he couldn't fully read, but some of them the short ones, the simple ones he recognized now. Dear, brother, come, home. 4 words. 4 keys to a lock he'd thought was rusted shut. But as he stared at the letter, another thought crept in. Cold, unwelcome. The town had eyes. Emmett Hollister had eyes. And 3 weeks of nightly lessons in a storeroom with a woman folks already pitied, that was the kind of thing people talked about. Luke folded the letter and put it back in his pocket. Tomorrow was Sunday. Church day. And if he wanted to keep learning, he'd have to decide what he was willing to let people see. The church bell rang at 10 o'clock sharp. Luke stood across the street, his cleanest shirt buttoned to the collar, watching folks file through the white clappered doors. He hadn't set foot in a church since his mother's funeral, 23 years ago. The preacher had talked about God's mercy while they lowered her pine box into the ground, and Luke had stopped believing in mercy right about then. But Clara went every Sunday. He'd seen her walking down the street each week, alone, her Bible tucked under her arm. She always sat in the back pew, always left before the final hymn ended. He crossed the street. The inside smelled of wood polish and candle wax. Rows of pews stretched toward a simple altar. A hand-pumped organ sat in the corner, Mrs. Patterson already stationed behind it, her fingers poised over the keys. Folks turned to look as Luke walked down the center aisle. He found a seat 3 pews behind Clara. She didn't turn around, but her shoulders stiffened slightly. She knew he was there. The preacher, a thin man with a voice too big for his body, opened with a prayer. Luke bowed his head, but didn't close his eyes. Through his lashes, he watched the congregation, watched them watching him. Mrs. Patterson hit the first chord of the opening hymn. Voices rose. Luke didn't know the words, so he stood silent, holding the hymnal like everyone else, pretending to read along. The irony wasn't lost on him. A month ago, he couldn't have pretended, wouldn't have known which way to hold the book. The service droned on. Scripture readings. Another hymn. A sermon about the prodigal son that seemed to last forever. Luke's collar itched. His boots pinched. He hadn't sat this still in months. When the final prayer ended, he stood with everyone else. Clara was already moving toward the side door, the one that led to the cemetery and the path back to the inn. "Mr. Barrow?" Mrs. Patterson materialized at his elbow, gray hair pinned beneath a bonnet, eyes sharp as tacks behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Ma'am? I don't believe I've seen you in church before. Are you a believer?" "My mother was—" "Ah." Mrs. Patterson's lips pursed. "And what brings you to our humble congregation today, the Hollister girl? Perhaps—" The question landed like a slap. Luke kept his face still. "Just felt like hearing some scripture. Ma'am?" Her eyes flicked toward the side door, where Clara had disappeared. Poor Emmett. As if that girl didn't have enough trouble without strange men taking an interest. Luke's hands curled at his sides. He forced them flat. "Good day, ma'am." He walked out the front door before she could say anything else. The October air hit his face, cool and clean. He breathed it in, letting it wash away the smell of candle wax and judgment. The general store opened at noon on Sundays. Luke needed writing paper. Real paper. Not the rough brown stuff he'd been practicing on. If he was going to write a letter, a real letter, to his sister, he wanted it to look proper. Clara had mentioned she needed thread from the mercantile herself. Said she'd go after church. The bell above the door jangled as he entered. Barrels of flour and sugar lined one wall. Salt pork hung from hooks near the ceiling. A glass case held penny candy, each jar labeled in careful script. He could read those labels now. Peppermint, whorehound, lemon drops. Help you. The clerk was a young man with a thin mustache and a bored expression. Luke approached the counter. "Writing paper? Best you got." 5 cents a sheet? 10 cents for the fancy stuff with the watermark. "Give me 5 of the fancy." The clerk counted out the sheets, wrapping them in brown paper. Luke paid with coins he'd been saving his gold dust for the wire transfer to Sarah. Well. The voice came from behind him. Luke turned. Billy Dawes leaned against the doorframe, blocking the exit. 22 years old, maybe 23, son of the biggest rancher in the valley. Sandy hair, weak chin, the kind of swagger that came from knowing his daddy owned half the town. 2 friends flanked him, ranch hands, by the look of them. Younger than Billy, eager to laugh at whatever he said. "Mountain man's buying paper." Billy's grin showed too many teeth. "What's the matter? Can't find enough bark up in them hills?" Luke tucked the paper under his arm. "Move. Now hold on." Billy pushed off from the doorframe. "I heard something interesting the other day. Heard you've been spending your evenings with Emmett Hollister's girl, in the back room, after the inn closes down." The ranch hands snickered. "Ain't your business." "See, that's where you're wrong." Billy stepped closer. Luke could smell whiskey on his breath, though it wasn't even 1 o'clock. "Everything that happens in this town is my business. My daddy pays half the wages around here. That makes folks my concern." Luke's jaw tightened. His hands stayed at his sides. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Move." Billy laughed. The sound bounced off the jars of penny candy. "Heard you're taking lessons from her. Learning to read, or just learning where she keeps the pie?" The ranch hands burst out laughing. One of them slapped his knee. Luke's vision narrowed. His fists balled up. He could lay this boy out flat. One punch, maybe two. The ranch hands would jump in. But Luke had fought off grizzlies with less provocation. He could end this in 30 seconds. But then what sheriff would come? Questions would be asked. Clara's name would be dragged through more mud than it already was. He unclenched his fists. Her name is Clara. Billy's grin faltered. What? Her name is Clara. Luke's voice came out flat, hard as iron. And she's smarter than anyone in this town. Including you. Especially you. He walked forward. Billy didn't move fast enough. Luke's shoulder caught him in the chest, spinning him aside. The ranch hands scrambled out of the way. Luke walked out without looking back. The door slammed behind him. He kept walking, past the church, past the livery stable, past the blacksmith's forge where hammer rang against anvil. He didn't stop until he reached the inn's back porch, and then he sat down on the top step and let his hands shake. He'd wanted to hit that boy. Wanted it so bad he could taste copper on his tongue. But he hadn't. He'd used words instead. That night, Clara was quiet during the lesson. She went through the motions, the primer, the slate, the sentences to copy, but something was off. Her voice sounded thin. Her eyes kept dropping to the chalk in his hand. Finally, Luke set down the slate. You going to tell me what's wrong, or do I have to guess? Clara's hands twisted in her apron. She didn't look up. I heard what you said. At the store. Luke's stomach dropped. Who told you? Nobody. I was there. She raised her eyes. In the back, by the dry goods. Looking for thread. I heard everything. The storeroom felt smaller than ever. The candle flame wavered. You shouldn't have had to hear that. No. Clara's voice was steady now. I shouldn't, but I did. And you said what you said. Seemed like someone ought to. Nobody ever has before. The words hung in the air. Luke didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Picked up the chalk, waited. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached over and took the slate from his hands. I think you're ready. Ready for what? A real letter. She pulled a fresh sheet of paper from her apron pocket. The fancy kind, with the watermark. You bought this today. Might as well use it. Luke stared at the paper. Clean, white, waiting. I don't know what to say. Sure you do. You know exactly what you want to say. You're just scared to say it. She handed him the pen. The steel nib caught the candlelight. Who are you fixing to write to? Luke dipped the pen in the inkwell, watched the black liquid cling to the metal. I ain't decided yet. Liar? He looked up. Clara's face was calm, but her eyes were warm. When you figure it out, she said, you let me know. She left him alone with the paper and the pen and the question he couldn't answer. Luke sat in the flickering candlelight. The blank page stared back at him. 2 letters he could write. One to Sarah, the sister waiting in Ohio. One to the woman who'd just walked out the door. His hand hovered over the paper. Outside. The wind picked up. The first drops of rain spattered against the window. Luke touched the pen to the page and stopped, because he'd just realized something that changed everything. The letter he wanted to write, the words building in his chest like water behind a dam, wasn't for his sister at all. The kitchen door banged open at 10:30. Clara jumped, nearly dropping the plate she was drying. Her father stood in the doorway, his face red from more than the cold. He'd been at the saloon. She could smell the whiskey from across the room. "Sit down." "Pa, I've got dishes to—" "I said sit down." She sat. The chair scraped against the wooden floor. The dish rag dripped water onto her lap, but she didn't move to wring it out. Emmett Hollister pulled out the chair across from her. He sat heavily, the wood creaking under his weight. His hands lay flat on the table, the knuckles swollen from decades of hard work. "Half the town thinks you're carrying on with that man." The words hit her like cold water. Clara's grip tightened on the dish rag. "I ain't carrying on with nobody, man. I'm teaching him to read." "Don't matter what's true." Emmett's voice was rough, worn down like an old saddle. "Matters what people think. And people think my daughter's been sneaking around with a drifter in the back room every night for a month? Let them think what they want. I don't care." "Well, I do." He slammed his palm on the table. The salt cellar jumped. "You think I like hearing my girl's name dragged through the mud at Harrison's saloon? You think I like Billy Dawes' daddy asking me if I'm running a different kind of establishment now?" Clara's face went hot, her throat tightened. "That ain't fair. Fair don't enter into it. This is business. This is survival. You want to teach some mountain tramp his letters? That's your affair. But not under my roof. Not while folks are talking. He ain't a tramp. I don't care what he is." Emmett stood. His chair fell backward and clattered against the floor. "I can't lose you too, Clara. Your mother?" He stopped. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words he couldn't swallow. "Your mother trusted folks too easy, gave too much of herself away. And look where it got her. Worked to death before she was 40. Clara's eyes burned, she blinked hard. That ain't the same thing." "Ain't it?" Emmett's voice cracked. For a moment, he looked old. Older than his 60 years. Smaller than she'd ever seen him. "I'm asking you to stop. Not forever. Just until this blows over. Can you do that for me?" The dish rag dripped onto her lap. The water was cold now. "I don't know." Emmett picked up his fallen chair, set it straight, walked to the door. "I'm going to bed. Think about what I said." He left. His footsteps creaked up the stairs and faded into silence. Clara sat alone in the kitchen. The lamp flame flickered. The dishes sat unwashed in their basin, the water gone gray and cold. No lesson tonight. She knew that without deciding it, the storeroom would stay dark. The slate would stay blank. She climbed the stairs to her room, undressed in the dark, lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. Sleep didn't come. The sound woke her before dawn. Hooves stamping on hard-packed dirt, the creak of leather, the clank of metal buckles. Clara sat up. The window showed gray light, the sun still below the mountains. Frost coated the glass in feathered patterns. She threw off the quilts and crossed to the window, rubbed a clear spot with her palm. The stable doors stood open. A figure moved inside, leading a mule. Luke. Her heart dropped into her stomach. She grabbed her shawl from the chair, the old one, moth-eaten, her mother's, and ran down the stairs barefoot. The kitchen floor was ice. The back door stuck on its hinges. She yanked it open and stumbled onto the porch. The ground hit her feet like a slap. Frozen mud, still soft in places from last night's rain. It squelched between her toes as she crossed the yard. Cold shot up through her ankles, her calves, her knees. She reached the stable doorway and stopped. Luke had his mule loaded, saddlebags bulging with beaver pelts, bedroll strapped tight, canteen hanging from the pommel. He was cinching the belly strap, his breath fogging in the gray light. "You're running." His hand stopped on the buckle. He didn't turn around. "I'm leaving." "Ain't the same thing." "Looks the same from where I'm standing." Now he turned. His face was drawn, stubbled, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "Your pa was right. I've brought you nothing but trouble. Half the town's talking. Billy Dawes and his daddy are making your life harder than it needs to be. Better if I just go." Clara's bare feet throbbed in the frozen mud. Her teeth chattered. Her toes had gone numb, but she didn't care. "You don't get to decide that. Decide what's trouble for me. That ain't your right." Luke's jaw tightened. He turned back to the mule, adjusting a strap that didn't need adjusting. "I never learned nothing good without it hurting somebody. That's just how it is for men like me. Better to leave before the hurt gets worse." "That's coward talk." The word landed hard. Luke's hands stilled. "What did you say?" Clara stepped into the stable. Her feet left the frozen mud and found the straw-covered dirt floor, only slightly warmer. She was shaking now, cold and something else she couldn't name. "I said that's coward talk. Running away because things got hard? Quitting because someone might say something mean? My pa's been talking mean to me my whole life. This whole town's been talking mean since I was old enough to understand. You think I don't know what it feels like to want to disappear?" Luke stared at her. The mule shifted its weight, stamping one hoof. "Then why don't you disappear? Leave. Go somewhere nobody knows you." "Because this is my home." Her voice cracked. She didn't try to hide it. "Because my mother's buried in that cemetery up the hill. Because my father needs me even if he don't know how to say it. Because I don't quit just because it hurts." The stable fell silent. Outside, a rooster crowed. The first rays of sunlight touched the mountaintops, turning the snow pink. "I never learned nothing good," Luke said again. Quieter this time. "My whole life, everything I ever wanted came at a cost. Cost my ma her health. Cost my sister her childhood. Cost me 23 years of pretending I was something I ain't." "Then you ain't finished learning yet." "What's that supposed to mean?" Clara pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her teeth chattered harder now. Her feet had gone from numb to burning. "It means stay. Finish what we started. Write that letter you've been working on. The one you won't tell me about." Luke's hand dropped from the saddle. He turned to face her fully. "Your pa won't like it." "My pa don't run my life. I'm 26 years old. I make my own choices, and I'm choosing to keep teaching you, whether he likes it or not." The mule stamped again. Somewhere in the rafters, a pigeon cooed. Luke looked at her for a long moment, her bare feet in the straw, her nightgown wet to the knees from the frozen mud, her face set in an expression he couldn't argue with. "I'll stay through the month." His voice was rough. "But I ain't making promises past that." "I ain't asking for promises." Clara's chin lifted. "Just asking you not to quit." She turned and hurried back toward the inn. Her frozen feet burned against the kitchen floor as she stumbled inside, wincing as feeling returned in painful needles. She gripped the counter, breathing hard, her whole body shaking. She didn't look back. Luke stood in the stable doorway, watching the kitchen door swing shut. The shawl had hung crooked on her shoulders. Her hair had come loose from its pins, falling dark against the worn gray wool. He started unloading the mule. That night, there was a lesson. Clara didn't mention the morning. Neither did Luke. They worked through the primer like nothing had happened. But something had changed. When the lesson ended, Clara stood to leave. At the door, she paused. "The letter you're writing, the one that ain't for your sister." Luke's hand tightened on the chalk. "What about it? Finish it. Whatever it says, whoever it's for." She looked back at him. "Some words need to be written down before they eat you alive." The door closed behind her. Luke sat alone in the candlelight, the slate in his lap, her words echoing in his ears. She knew. Somehow, she knew. And now he had to decide what he was going to do about it. 2 months changed how a man saw the world. Luke stood outside the sheriff's office, staring at the wanted posters nailed to the board. 3 faces, 3 names, 3 rewards in dollar amounts. He read them all slow, sounding out the harder words in his head, skipping the ones that still tangled his tongue. Jacob Henry Whitmore, armed robbery, $200 reward. Thomas, Red McAllister, horse theft, $150 reward. Samuel Crane, murder, $500 reward. Dead or alive? The letters made sense now. Not all of them, the long words still gave him trouble. But enough. He traced the shapes with his eyes, the way Clara had taught him, letting the easy ones flow without thinking. The words weren't walls anymore. They were doors. Even if some of them stuck. He walked down the main street. The signs he'd passed 100 times before announced themselves like old friends introducing themselves properly at last. Harrison's Saloon, Mercantile and Dry Goods, Blacksmith, Horses Shod, Hollister's Inn, Rooms and Meals. Hollister's Inn. He could read it now. Could write it too, if someone asked. The church bulletin board caught his eye. Sunday's sermon topic, the parable of the talents. He knew that story. His mother had told it to him once, long ago. Now he could read the words that described it. Something shifted in his chest. A loosening, like a belt buckle finally undone after a long ride. That night, the storeroom felt different. Clara had brought a newspaper, 3 days old, from Denver. But print was print. She spread it on the crate between them and pointed to the headline. "Read it." Luke leaned forward. The candle flame danced, throwing shadows across the page. Railroad. Expansion. Reaches. Colorado. Territory. Keep going. The Denver and Rio Grande Railway announced plans to extend its lines through the mountain passes. He read the headline and the first few sentences. The smaller words in the article still gave him trouble. He skipped the ones he couldn't sound out, but the meaning came through. When he finished the paragraph, he looked up. Clara sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching him. "You don't need me no more." The words hit him like cold water. "That ain't true." "Luke," her voice was gentle but firm. "You just read a newspaper headline, front to back. You can write your name. You can write your sister's name. You can read the menu and the church bulletin and the wanted posters outside the sheriff's office. How'd you know about the wanted posters? I saw you standing there this morning. Saw your lips moving. Luke looked down at the newspaper. The ink had smudged where his thumb rested. Reading is one thing, writing is another. You can write? I've seen you. Copying letters from a primer ain't the same as writing something real, something that comes from inside. Clara was quiet for a moment. The candle guttered, nearly out. She reached for the spare, lit it from the dying flame, and set it in place. What do you want to write? Luke's throat tightened. The question he'd been avoiding for 2 weeks. A letter. To your sister. He didn't answer. Couldn't answer. The truth sat in his chest like a stone. Clara stood, brushed chalk dust from her apron, though there was no chalk dust tonight, just habit. When you're ready to write it, she said. You will? She left. The door closed softly behind her. Luke sat alone with the newspaper and the dying candle. His reflection wavered in the dark window glass, a stranger's face, weathered and tired, nothing like the boy who'd watched his mother die. Tomorrow. He told himself tomorrow he'd write it. Tomorrow came and went, then another tomorrow, then another. He bought paper from the general store. Good paper. With a watermark. Bought a new pen 2 steel nib. Finer than the one he'd been practicing with. Bought ink that wasn't watered down. The supplies sat on the small desk in his room for 3 days before he touched them. On the 4th night, he lit a candle and sat down. The paper lay before him, white and empty. The pen felt heavy in his hand. He dipped it in the inkwell, watched the black liquid cling to the metal. Dear Clara. He stared at the words. They looked wrong, too formal, too stiff, like a stranger's handwriting. He crumpled the paper, tossed it toward the corner, pulled out a fresh sheet. Clara. No. Too short. Too abrupt. Another crumpled ball joined the first. Dear Clara. He wrote the words again. Forced himself to continue. I ain't good with words. He stopped. Looked at what he'd written. The letters were crooked. Uneven, a child's scrawl from a grown man's hand. Crumple. Toss. Fresh sheet. The floor around his chair filled with paper balls. White shapes in the candlelight. Each one a failure. The candle burned lower. His hand cramped. Ink stained his fingers. The web between thumb and forefinger gone black. He pulled out another sheet, dipped the pen. Dear Clara, I ain't good with words, but you gave me some anyway. The pen stopped. He read it back, read it again. Something was there, something true. He kept writing. You saw something in me. Nobody else did. What had she seen? He didn't know. Couldn't say. But it was true. She'd looked at him that first night, the night he'd signed with an X, and hadn't turned away. I don't know what it was. The words came slower now. Each one pulled from somewhere deep, somewhere he'd kept locked for 42 years. But you saw it. The candle flame flickered. He shielded it with his hand. Kept writing. I've been alone so long I forgot what it felt like to be seen alone. The word looked strange on paper, smaller than it felt in his chest. Reckon I still don't know where I belong, the pen hovered. He thought about the mountains, the silence, the stars like spilled flour on a black skillet. He'd told her about all of that, and she'd listened like it mattered. But I know this porch. He could see it in his mind. The warped boards. The step where she'd sat that first night. Below him. Equal. And this town small, mean, full of gossip and judgment. But hers, home. And you sitting there, with your book. The image came clear. Clara before dawn, flour on her apron, Jane Eyre propped against the tin, her lips moving with the words. It's the closest to home I ever felt. His hand shook. The letters wobbled. He kept going. I ain't asking for nothing. Was that true? He didn't know anymore. I just wanted you to know. The pen lifted. He looked at the page. 12 lines. 53 words. Crooked letters. Ink smudges. A blot where his hand had rested too long. It wasn't much. He signed it at the bottom. Luke. Not an X. His name. 4 letters. The first word she'd ever taught him. He set down the pen. His fingers ached. The candle had burned to a stub, the flame barely clinging to the wick. The crumpled papers lay scattered around his feet. A dozen failures. A dozen almost truths that hadn't been true enough. But this one was real. He stood and crossed to the wash basin, splashed water on his face, looked up at the tin mirror nailed to the wall. The stranger looked back. 42 years old. Beard going gray. Lines around the eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. He picked up the letter, held it in front of him. Dear Clara. His voice sounded strange in the small room. Too loud. Too raw. He read the letter aloud. Word by word. The way she'd taught him slow, letting each one land before moving to the next. His voice cracked on scene. He stopped, swallowed, started the line again. I've been alone so long I forgot what it felt like to be seen. The words echoed off the plaster walls. He heard them the way she would hear them if he ever had the courage to give her this. He folded the letter carefully. Once, twice, slid it into an envelope he'd bought at the general store. His pen hovered over the front. Clara. One word. Her name. Written by his own hand. He set down the pen, looked at the envelope, looked at the mess of crumpled paper around his feet. Tomorrow, he'd give it to her tomorrow. But even as he thought it, doubt crept in like cold air under a door. What if she laughed? What if she pitied him? What if she read those 12 lines and saw not a man's heart, but a child's, scribbling, pathetic, clumsy, not worth the paper it was written on? He tucked the envelope inside his coat, close to his chest, where it could stay hidden. 3 days. He carried it for 3 days, felt it crinkle every time he moved, thought about it while he split wood, while he ate breakfast, while he lay in bed staring at the ceiling. 3 days of almost, 3 days of not yet, 3 days of tomorrow, always tomorrow. On the 4th day, Emmett Hollister found him in the stable. You're still here? Luke looked up from brushing the mule. The old man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the morning light. Still here? My daughter's fond of you. The brush stopped moving. Luke's hand tightened on the handle. She's a good woman. Better than this town deserves. On that we agree. Emmett stepped into the stable. His boots crunched on the straw. I ain't going to pretend I like what's been happening. The lessons, the talk, the way folks look at her now. I know what you meant. Emmett stopped a few feet away. His eyes were tired, the skin beneath them dark with sleepless nights. My wife was the same way. Saw good in folks whether it was there or not. Gave pieces of herself away until there wasn't nothing left. Luke said nothing. I don't want that for Clara. I don't want her giving herself to someone who's just going to leave. Who's just going to take what he needs and disappear back up that mountain? The mule stamped its foot. Dust motes drifted in the morning light. I ain't planning on leaving. Planning and doing are two different things. Emmett's voice was hard, but his eyes were something else. Afraid. Maybe. Hopeful. Luke couldn't tell. You got something you want to say to her. You say it. Today, don't drag this out any longer than it needs dragging. He turned and walked out of the stable. Luke stood alone with the mule and the silence and the letter burning a hole in his coat. Today, not tomorrow. Today. The afternoon sun hung low over the mountains, turning the aspens to copper and gold. Luke found her on the back porch. Clara sat on the top step, her journal open in her lap, a pencil tucked behind her ear. She wore the gray shawl her mother's, the one with the moth holes pulled tight against the November chill. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. She looked up when she heard his boots on the frozen ground. You're back early. I thought you were helping Mr. Carson with his fence. Finished. Luke stopped at the bottom of the steps. His hand went to his coat pocket. Felt the envelope there. Warm from his body heat. Mind if I sit? Since when do you ask? He climbed the steps and lowered himself onto the wood beside her. Not too close. Not too far. The boards creaked under his weight. For a long moment, neither spoke. The mountains turned purple in the fading light. A hawk circled high above the tree line, riding the thermals. Clara closed her journal. Set the pencil on top of it. You've got something on your mind. How can you tell you're sitting still, you pouch? You never sit still unless you're thinking hard about something. Luke's hand tightened on the envelope in his pocket. The paper crinkled against his fingers. Your pa talked to me this morning. I know. I saw him come back from the stable. He said I should say what I need to say. Today. Not tomorrow. Clara turned to look at him. Her face was calm, but her eyes held something he couldn't read. Expectation. Maybe. Or fear. And what do you need to say? Luke pulled the envelope from his pocket. Held it out to her. Her name was written on the front. Clara. His handwriting crooked. Careful. Unmistakably his. What's this? Open it. She took the envelope, turned it over in her hands. Her fingers traced the letters of her name, the way his had traced the letters on the slate that first night. Luke, just open it. Please. She slid her finger under the flap. The paper tore with a soft sound. She pulled out the single sheet and unfolded it. Her eyes moved across the page. Her lips parted slightly. You want me to read it out loud? If you don't mind. His voice came out rough. I want to hear how it sounds when it ain't just me talking to myself in a mirror. Clara looked at him, looked back at the letter, drew a breath. Dear Clara. Her voice was quiet, steady. I ain't good with words, but you gave me some anyway. She paused. The hawk had disappeared beyond the ridge. You saw something in me nobody else did. I don't know what it was, but you saw it. Luke's hands gripped his knees. He watched her face the way a man watches the sky before a storm. I've been alone so long, I forgot what it felt like to be seen. Her voice caught on seen. She stopped, swallowed, started again. Reckon I still don't know where I belong, but I know this porch, and this town, and you sitting there with your book. It's the closest to home I ever felt. The last of the sunlight slipped behind the mountains. The porch fell into shadow. I ain't asking for nothing. I just wanted you to know. She looked at the bottom of the page. Luke, silence. The wind picked up, rattling the bare branches of the cottonwood tree at the edge of the yard. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Clara folded the letter. Slowly, carefully. The creases lined up perfectly with the ones he'd made. You wrote this. Every word. It took you 4 days. You knew. I saw the ink on your fingers. Saw you sitting at breakfast staring at nothing. Figured you were working on something. She held the letter in both hands. Her knuckles were red from the cold. It ain't Shakespeare, Luke said. No. Clara looked up at him. Her eyes were wet, but no tears fell. It ain't. That's why it's good. The words hit him somewhere deep, a place he'd kept locked so long he'd forgotten it existed. Clara, you wrote me a letter? Her voice was thick. In your own hand, with words you chose yourself. Do you know how long it's been since anyone gave me something like that? He didn't answer, couldn't answer. Never. She said it flat, without self-pity. A fact, nothing more. That's how long. Never in my whole life. The wind died down. The silence stretched between them. But it wasn't uncomfortable. More like the silence after a storm passes clean. Washed. New. What happens now? Clara asked. Luke looked at the mountains. The first stars were coming out, faint pinpricks against the darkening sky. I don't know. Was hoping maybe you could keep teaching me. Teaching you what you can read better than half this town now. Other things. He turned to face her. Bigger words. How to write proper letters. How to... He stopped. The words stuck in his throat. How to what? How to stay. Clara didn't look away. Her eyes held his in the gathering dark. You want to stay? I want to try. He said it slow, feeling the weight of each word. Ain't never tried staying anywhere before. Don't know if I'm any good at it. But I figure if I could learn to read at 42, maybe I can learn other things too. She was quiet for a long moment. The frost was starting to form on the porch railing, thin crystals catching the starlight. Then she slid the letter into her journal, pressed the cover closed, held it against her chest. Well, she stood, brushed off her skirt. I reckon we got time to figure that out. She walked to the back door, paused with her hand on the latch. You coming in? Supper's almost ready? In a minute. She nodded. Went inside. The door closed softly behind her. Luke sat alone on the porch. The cold seeped through his coat, but he didn't move. He watched the stars multiply across the sky, filling in the darkness, one point of light at a time. 2 months and a week. That's how long he'd been here. Longer than he'd stayed anywhere since his mother died. Longer than he'd stayed with anyone who wasn't kin. He looked down at his hands. The chalk calluses had faded, replaced by something else, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. His fingers knew how to hold a pen now, knew how to shape letters into words and words into meaning. The back door opened. Clara stood in the light from the kitchen, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. "Thought you might be cold." She handed him one and sat down beside him. Closer this time. Her shoulder almost touching his. The coffee was hot, black, bitter. The way he liked it. "I brought something else too." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a book. Small, leather-bound, the spine cracked from use. Jane Eyre. "You finished the primer. Time for something harder." She opened the book to the first page, held it so he could see. "Read the first line." Luke leaned closer. The letters were smaller than the primer, more tightly packed, but he could make them out. There was no possibility of taking walk that day. His voice was slow, halting, but the words came. Clara turned the page when he finished. Then the next. Her voice joined his sometimes, filling in the hard words, letting him sound out the easy ones. The coffee went cold in their cups. The frost thickened on the railing. The stars wheeled overhead in their slow, eternal dance. Neither one moved to go inside. In Clara's journal, pressed flat between pages, filled with her mother's handwriting and her own, a letter waited. 12 lines, 53 words. A mountain man's heart, spelled out letter by letter in crooked, careful script. Kept. The way some things ought to be. There is something quiet that stays with us after a story like this one. A weight in the chest, perhaps. A tenderness around the edges of the heart. It's sunken. It does not ask to be named or explained. Many of us have carried things we could not speak aloud. Some of us have loved without recognition, given without acknowledgement, waited for someone to see what we had been hiding all along. Perhaps you have sat with a person who looked past the surface and found something worth keeping. Perhaps you were that person for someone else and never knew it. These things do not need to be resolved. They are allowed to rest where they are unfinished, imperfect, still breathing somewhere in the back of our memories. A letter written in crooked handwriting. A name spelled out for the very first time. 2 people on a cold porch. A book held open between them. Neither one ready to go inside. It is enough. It has always been enough. I am grateful you stayed until the end. I am grateful we shared this quiet evening together. May your night be gentle. And may someone, somewhere, see you exactly as you are. Good night, friends.